And we could talk about that. So I have multiple versions of life crisis is how I like to call them that we could talk about.
Okay. All right. Well, let's do that.
Welcome. Today we are going to talk to a true warrior. She has survived cancer, 2 tornadoes of total devastation, as well as being a caretaker for her father who was diagnosed as well, all at the same 2-year time span. You're not going to want to miss this. We're going to be talking to Lori Marini from Lori Marini Coaching and Conversations with Courageous Cancer Warriors. And we are so blessed to hear her heroic story of how she survived and is on the other side now helping others do the same. Hi, this is Tracy from Multiform PTSD. So glad you're here. Let's go ahead and listen in.
I am here with Lori, and I am so happy to have her here and be so willing to share her story. She is a PA, and she has her own podcast show talking to and helping out cancer patients. And I just am so glad to have her here. She was so gracious to have me on her show, and now I get to have her on mine, and I'm so excited because I love talking to you, and I'm so glad we get another chance.
I am so happy to do this. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. So I feel like we've had a lot of things that we've talking about today. So let's just jump right in. So tell me, let's start off with, how did you get into doing this podcast show and working with cancer patients? And we'll go from there. How did you get started with that?
So I have 20 years experience as a pathologist assistant. So I have worked in oncology for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
You could think of me as a tumor expert. I know everything there is to know about tumors and how to, when you get surgery done,
Mm-hmm.
your surgeon doesn't handle the tissue. The pathologist doesn't see anything but the slides. They hire somebody like me to make sure that you're taken care of. And I'm part of the diagnostic process. So I've spent a lot of time handling human tissue. I spent a lot of time working in research. I spent a lot of time in diagnostics. And, that was my wheelhouse. Like, I loved it. I loved helping people. And then I was pushed to the other side of the table when I went for my baseline mammogram, and I found 4 lesions in my left breast. So the thing with this story that I really, when I think about it, is like mind-blowing, is the fact that the year before I had seen my primary care provider at 40, and she's like, Lori, she's like, it's time, you need to go and get that mammogram. Well, I was so busy working and setting up a new center for precision medicine, which is a genomic center, that I never went for that exam. So when I showed up at 41 and I said to her, like, I was so apologetic. I'm like, I am so sorry. I promise you, I'm going to go for that test. She was like, Laura, don't worry about it. You just bought yourself 4 years. They changed the guidelines to 45. And having had the experience of working firsthand with metastatic breast cancer patients,
Mm-hmm.
and knowing what devastation cancer can really do, to people, that it didn't sit well with me, but I left there being like, okay, whatever. So she did a self-exam, like we were all set. She's like, I'll see you next year. And I'm like, perfect. And then I went home and I kind of sat with it and I was like, okay, whatever. And shortly after, I had a dream that I was riddled with cancer. So I woke up in a panic. I was living alone at the time. I called up my bestie and I was like, I am freaked out. And for some reason, I automatically thought, I need to go get that mammogram, right? And so
Wow.
I don't know why. I have no family history. I was in the best shape of my life. I was eating really healthy. Like, there was no indication that there would ever have been something.
Right.
So I called up a center that wasn't where I worked, because I didn't want people to see my, if anything, didn't want people to see your stuff so bad. So
Yep.
I called the place across the street, and they just happened to have an opening the very next day. I showed up there the very next day, not thinking anything of it, just went in, and they called me back immediately, and they're like, hey, we need to repeat your imaging. Now, I didn't think anything of it because, I know I had dense fibrous tissue, like dense breasts. I knew I had fibrocystic changes, which sometimes show up as like a possible area of concern. So when they called me back, I was kind of like, yeah, no big deal. And then so we went back in and they're like, we want to do an enhanced 3D imaging. And so they gave me contrast. And I was kind of like, my ears perked up a bit, like, this isn't normal, but they said it was like a research study. So I was like, no problem. And we had it done. And then they put me into ultrasound. And when they did ultrasound, they examined my breast by ultrasound, but then they started going in my lymph nodes and I saw them start measuring my nodes. Now, these are the images that I have looked at for the past 20 years as I help diagnose patients. So as I'm sitting on that table, they are on image 65. I was like, we have a problem. Like, nobody needed to tell me. I knew. And the thing about it is that, like, those lights that they have on the ceiling, right? I remember staring at it and they're like, it was all colorful.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at it and I was kind of like planning my will, planning what I'm going to do when I make it out of this whole mess. Like, my brain went crazy. And then I said to myself, I'm like, oh, now I understand why they have these really pretty lights above head, right?
Oh.
Like, it was one of those things that, like, at that moment, I went from a practitioner to a patient. And it wasn't something I was very comfortable with. So they said to me, you need to come back in for a biopsy. And so when I went back in for a biopsy, nobody had yet told me, like, hey, you have 4 masses, like, you have cancer, we're really concerned. Nobody said anything. Nobody said anything. I went in for my biopsy, got my biopsies taken.
Oh my.
And then asked her, like, what is going on? And, like, the lady paused and, like, nobody wanted to tell me what I had going on, right? And I don't know if it's because I was part of the family. I don't know if it's because, like, I presented in such a way that it would have been a total surprise for me, or if it's because my lesions were on the larger side that they were, like, kind of really concerned. I don't know. To this day, I don't know. But what I do know is when I showed up for those biopsies, I was a terrible patient, like terrible patient, to the point that I looked at the assistant that's, like, prepping me. And I was like, look, I just need to let you know, like, I want an attending only touching me. So for those of you who may or may not be aware how the academic center is, you'll have residents in training and you always have an attending that supervises. And you do have the right to not have a resident touch you, right? Like, you can have an attending, you can request an attending regardless of where you go. So that was my request. And the lady kind of looked at me like, okay. And so when the attending came in, she was kind of like, you realize you're in a teaching institution, right? And I was like, yeah. And I also realized that my right is I can actually, say that I don't want a resident to perform any procedures on me. And I'm not interested in having any extra passes for, their practice. I said, so can we just please hurry up and get this over? And it's, like, not the smartest move because I'm, like, pissing her off before she actually goes and does my test, right? Like, and in hindsight, it probably wasn't that, but I was just so nervous. And that's kind of where this whole journey began, was that I now had firsthand all the stuff that I learned up until that point. And as I went through this process, I recognized some of the pain and suffering that people go through. So, like, when you're in the medical field for a while, and you'll understand this, as you work, your brain switches over. Like, you stay professional, you have a professional job, you know what you need to do, you can't get emotional, and, like, you are just, it's almost like we're not robots, but we're very trained to perform a certain skill.
Right.
And so when I was on the other side and seeing what people had gone through, I now can never say to myself, like, oh my God, look how cool this tumor is and how it grew here and there and there and there. I automatically go, like, that poor patient. Like, it changed me forever. And and I was very fortunate for the fact that my treatment happened at the same place where I worked. So I knew where the cafeteria was. I knew where the bathroom was. I knew where to park. I knew where my doctor's office was. I knew how to get to the hospital, right? Like, I knew all the little things that are such huge stressors for people.
Right.
And I was still overwhelmed. I was still like, oh my God, like, what is happening? And I was a basket case. And I knew it. This is my field. And I understood the medical language, right?
Yeah.
And so that's when I had the realization that if I feel this way, how do other people do it?
Mm-hmm.
And I've always thought about being like a patient advocate. I was always like, I'm the person that will ask you before you ask me, like, do you need directions? Right. I've always just tried to
Right.
just be really great with people. And so it was a really easy transition for me to start my new business, which is as a life, wellness, and a cancer coach.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've been doing is working with people who have gone through this crisis, through this journey. They've gone through the treatments. And now, like, once you go through your treatments, you're kind of left on your own. Like, you could choose to get a therapist, you could choose to get a social worker, but all of that goes away once you stop treatment. Like, they provide it to you as you go through treatment. And then once your treatments are done, it's like, see you in 6 months, like, see you later.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't really provide that for you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I like to step in, because that's when the emotional component starts for people. Right? Like, that's when you catch up to everything that you've just gone through. I mean, I find that it's not easy, but it's easier to go through the motions of like, okay, I have an appointment on Monday, I have an appointment on Thursday, and like, you just kind of go appointment to appointment.
Right.
And then when you're left to handle the emotional stuff, you're like, and it usually hits, in my opinion and in my research, usually hits 2 years out.
Okay.
2 years after you're done with treatment, you get hit with a brick wall and you are like, what is happening? And up until this point, you're just like, I'm fine, I'm good, I'm fine. And you're going through all the stuff and you making sure your diet is still good. And then something happens where the trauma of what you've just gone through physically catches up with you emotionally. And that's why I started my business.
I love it.
To be a support.
I love it. I am a nurse, and I kind of had
You get it.
Yeah, I totally get it, because I actually have gone into a patient where there's a code going on, and we get so focused on the patient that I watched another nurse yell at a family member and say, I need you to get this person out of here. I need room. And I was coming into the room at the time, and I was like, ooh, like, I got why she was there, because we are trained. I mean, this person's life is ending. We are trying to bring them back and help them. Family members, the emotional part just kind of goes out. But I wasn't quite emotionally detached yet, if that's a good way to say it. Probably not, but you understand what I'm saying. And so I could see that situation for what it was. And I was like, okay. So I made a note and went in there and did my job the way we're trained to do. And then afterwards, I had a family member who knew me said, I want to report that nurse and blah, blah, blah. And I said, I completely understand. But this is what we're trained to do. We are we were focused on your family member at that time. And I know that sounded harsh, but she did what we are trained to do. She prioritized them.
Yeah.
She didn't mean any harm. And so it's really hard to sometimes click that on and off and realize that there's other things, like you mentioned, where to park and where the hospital even is. And I mean, you knew a lot of those things already, and it was still stressful. And I love how that
it was
made
terrible.
And as a practitioner and someone who works with patients, I feel like every healthcare professional needs to be in the hospital for a length of time or have to do like major tests or something, just to kind of get that vision of how they're actually feeling. Sometimes we get so focus on the physical, what is physically going wrong with the patient, that we forget that there's a whole nother emotional side to all of that, and their support systems. So I love that it changed you said.
Yeah, and the thing too is that, so as I was going through my healing, I ended up electing to get a bilateral mastectomy with reconstruction, and that's a whole other different story. But as I'm going through my own healing, my dad, and I was debating whether or not he would care about me talking about this, but I think he'd be fine with this. My dad ended up getting diagnosed with multiple myeloma. Now, when you are part of the medical family, when you're part of the medical family, everybody comes to you, right? And you need to be the strong one. So for my own journey, I didn't really talk about about what I was going through with people, because if I seem worried, then everybody else is going to get worried.
Exactly.
I pissed a lot of people off because I wasn't sharing my feelings. There was a selected few people who knew what was going on that I would update. But for the most part, I kept it really quiet till probably almost 2 years. And part of it was because my dad ended up needing a caregiver. So I picked up all my belongings, I threw them in storage, I moved to Connecticut, where my dad was from Boston, and I supported him. And I went to every doctor's appointment with him. And I recognized that as I was going through that with him, so my parents are, English is their second language, their first language is Italian. And, you know, they're smart people, but medicine has become so complicated that the words that the physicians and everybody is using, like, they don't know. It's not a standard language.
No.
So I found it, and part of what I found was that, like, people are talking over his head to a point that to this day, none of my family, my mom and my dad, cannot go to the doctor without me being on the phone at least. And, you know, are kind of like, oh, okay, I get it, but they don't get it. Like, my mom got scheduled for a bone marrow biopsy and she didn't even know why, right? So it's kind of like those things where people just need support. They need people to kind of be there, to be your cheerleader, to be your advocate, and to kind of like be the stand for you that sometimes you don't realize you need to be a stand for. You know what I mean? So that's what drives me. That's my why. I feel like everybody deserves to understand what their pathology report says. Everybody needs to understand, like, what the treatments options are. You know that you have standard surgery, but you also have holistic therapies available to you. And then, like, throughout this whole thing, you still have that emotional side, and, like, you're just supposed to put on a brave face. And sometimes you just can't do it. And then people are like, don't worry, you'll be fine. You know what? I don't feel fine today.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Like, and you don't know what I'm going through.
Right. Kind of go on with that a little bit. So how did you, when people, you're fine, and no, I'm not fine. How did you handle it? If you want to talk on it or not, that's up to you. How did you deal with, I'm not fine? And at what point did you say, was there a point where you said, okay, I'm not fine? And then at what point did you know it was time to move forward and try and be okay? Because I feel like we talked about last time, there's a time where it's okay to grieve and give your feelings a voice and feel heard and all of that. But then there's a time to move forward and say, okay, yeah, that stunk, but now we're going to move forward.
Yeah. And with any health crisis, especially with something like cancer, where you are mutilated, right? Like, your body will no longer be the same, whether you can see it or it's internal. There's always going to be some accommodation you need to do because they took out 20 centimeters of your colon, right? Like something.
Right.
So that question is twofold for me. Professionally, I found myself having a very difficult time going back into a field where I was supposed to be helping people who were literally at the end stage of life, right? They were metastatic patients. They were going on a clinical trial in the hopes that maybe they could find something that might be able to help them. And I believe in manifesting. I believe, like, you manifest your future. So it was really difficult for me to try to heal in that environment, and still be a good support to them. I found myself crying on the elevator. I was going home and just mentally, just emotionally distraught. And over time, I found the courage to leave a career. I still do some work in it. I work part-time, like per diem, but I couldn't do the full time anymore and be okay and heal myself. So that's one of the things, as you go through this process, like, really listen to yourself for what works for you and what doesn't work for you. Like, I'm very fortunate that I had the ability to find a different position with my skill set, right? That didn't involve being right up front and center with patients. Like, I went and worked for a biotech company and, like, did something different. And I know not everybody has that option.
Right.
But even personally, but if that option is available to you, like find somebody that could just be your sounding board and just talk it through, and the pros, the cons, like where will this go? And just know you could always go back to your old job or something similar, but sometimes it's okay to take a break. And then personally, I struggled because I didn't want people to see, I didn't want people to worry about me. So especially, I was very blessed that I went through surgery. Like I said, I got a bilateral mastectomy and I healed physically. And even though I was a stage 2, I didn't have any positive lymph nodes. So they elected not to give me radiation or chemotherapy. So once I was healed, and my healing process was a year and a half physically, and I still have complications 3 years later, but it was a long haul recovery, not just the 12 weeks that they tell you, hey, you're going to be home.
Right.
And it was a year and a half of struggle. And the example that always comes to mind for me is I was so proud of, I literally for 10 weeks, there was somebody physically in my house every day. Now, I like my alone time, and it was a 600 square foot apartment. Do you know what I mean? I was like, after like week 10, I'm like, y'all gotta go, like get out, like, like I don't care what the Excel spreadsheet says, like you gotta go, I'm good.
Right.
And, and I know it came from a place of love that people wanted to support me, but
Right.
I was so excited because I dressed myself. I was able to get out of my building. I lived in downtown Boston. Out of my building, I walked around the corner and I went to Starbucks. All I wanted was a Starbucks coffee, right? I was so excited. I hadn't been out of my house in 3 months, right? On my own. So I was like, this is amazing. I felt so proud of myself. It was an accomplishment, right? And like, that's the thing too, like recognize the small wins, the small victories are what you hold on to. But then I get to Starbucks and it's an old school Boston building. Like I grab the handle to the door, I pull. I can't do it. So I pull with my other hand. I can't do it. I pull with both. I can't open the door. I do not have the physical strength to open the door. Now, mind you, I still can't open bottles. Like there's things, right, that happens. And I just felt so defeated in something that was so like, I'm so excited. I was just like, this is terrible. And it brought me back. Like I took 10 steps back that day. And I remember just standing there like not knowing what to do with myself. And some guy showed up and opened the door and kind of looked at me like, weirdo, why are you standing out here? But like he had no idea that I couldn't physically get myself in there.
Right.
So that's like the emotional side is you're gonna have examples of that continuously. I believe, I personally believe like for the rest of your life, there's always going to be a reminder, like October's coming up. Breast cancer awareness is coming around the corner. We're going to get bombarded with, hey, you have breast cancer, right? And so like you need to develop tools to be okay that that's going to happen. You're not going to be able to shield yourself from everything. Like you're going to turn a movie on and it's going to have somebody with cancer in it, right? Because that's the way it goes. And, but for me, the big thing was meditating, journaling. And then I started a daily blog post, and it was a daily gratitude post. So what it was is I didn't want to focus on the negative. So as I went through my life, I found things every day that would move me, inspire me, make me smile. And I would take a picture. And at the end of my day, at night, right before I went to bed, I would go through my pictures and see the one that called to me the most. And I would write about how that made me feel and what I learned from, having that experience. And it was really, really therapeutic for me. And that's how I was just able to process what I was going through. But it also kept me in a positive mindset. So when I couldn't go to Starbucks on my own, I was like, okay, but at least I have that, right? So I wasn't dwelling in the whole, like what I can't do. I was looking for things that would inspire me to continue moving forward every day.
And that is exactly, that's beautiful. I am so grateful you shared your story, because that is exactly what I try and teach is you celebrate those little wins. You
Yeah.
and give yourself grace when you have, I mean, you had that, you were celebrating that win, you were getting to Starbucks, you were outside on your own, and then you just kind of had this crashing down of defeat. And
Yeah.
you know what? Sometimes you just have to give yourself some grace and give yourself permission to be sad and upset about that. But you chose to focus on the positive. Now, I'm sure you gave that loss some time and process that a little bit, but then you moved forward. I would love to talk to you. So I too am about energy and manifesting and the law of gratitude and all of those things. I'm all about it. I don't find many medical personnel that do practice or even give it much thought. Can you go a little bit into how you work that in?
Oh, I'm so happy you asked that question, because I had an experience this week where I started with a new oncologist.
Okay.
I hope it's okay for me to share this.
Absolutely.
But I started with a new oncologist this week, and I was super excited to meet with her because, one, I hadn't been seen in a year, and I'm supposed to be going every 6 months. I hadn't had blood work in a year and a half. And I'm really trying to make Sarasota my home after we lost our home in Nashville to the tornado, which is a completely different traumatic event. But I get there and she's not as warm and fuzzy as I wanted her to be. I expected her that because she mentored under my oncologist in Boston, who was absolutely amazing, and I wish I could just take him around with me everywhere. I expected her to be the same. And then when she showed that she wasn't, I was let down, right? Like I was like, oh, okay. But I gave her a chance. And so I asked her, I said, hey, so I'm on tamoxifen. I've had a really rough go with tamoxifen. It's an awful drug. I stopped it for a while to just heal my body. And then I started again. And I was fortunate enough to get a different brand that doesn't give me as much side effects. But I went there was like, hey, I really hate tamoxifen. Like, what are my options? And she's like, no, tamoxifen is good. And I was like, okay. So I'm like, well, what about alternative therapies? Like, can we talk about high dose vitamin C? Can we talk about ozone? Can we talk about hyperbaric oxygen chambers? And her exact words to me were, you're going to be spending a lot of money for something that probably isn't going to work. And I was like, right? Like, wait, what do you mean?
Right.
And then I asked, I said, okay, well, can we also talk about, like, maybe if I could I've never had imaging in my life because of the way I presented. I'm like, can I get some imaging? She's like, we only give imaging if you show up again with a nodule or pain in your long bones. That hip pain that you're having, like, is not going to classify you for an image. Okay. And I'm like, well, can we talk about circulating tumor cells? Like, do you provide that here? And she's like, nope, that got debunked 5 years ago. And I'm saying to myself, I'm like, there are companies founded on circulating tumor cells. Like, what do you mean?
Right.
So, I left there saying, like, okay, like, she doesn't believe in any alternative treatments.
Right.
And for me, I do believe we are made of energy. I do believe that your thoughts are reality. I do believe that, like, your intuition is so strong. Like, if I didn't have that dream, if the angels that are above that are protecting me did not send me that dream, I probably wouldn't be sitting here today.
Right.
So I do believe in it. I believe that you can be at the forefront of how you want your life to be. And that's what I work with people with, like, okay, what do you want? Like, let's create a vision board for your life and move forward. Like, what do you want it to be? What do you want it to look like? Like, let's envision it. And by having that, by putting it in your future, you don't even realize that you take the small steps to get there. It's like, it's in the core of us. It's like, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not subliminal, but you know what I mean, right? Like, you're doing it and you don't even realize it. Like, it's kind of like how marketing works. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. It's like how marketing works. It's like you
Mm-hmm.
see you see the quarter pounder with cheese, and then, 5 hours later, you're like, I could really go for a hamburger, right? Like, it's the
Power
way
of
it works.
suggestion.
100%. And energy is like that. So
Mm-hmm.
I truly believe that by standing in a powerful place for yourself,
Mm-hmm.
positive mindset, gratitude daily, meditation, like quiet your mind so you are not frantic. I have been diagnosed with adult onset ADHD because of my medication, right? Like, I've always been hyperactive,
Mm-hmm.
but it made it terrible to the point that I couldn't finish sentences, right? And I know that if I don't meditate, like, even with medication, if I choose to take it that day, I'm still not zen. I'm still not in my own power. I'm still not focused on what I need to do for the day.
Mm-hmm.
And it affects my relationships. It
Mm-hmm.
reflects the relationship I have with people around me, but it also reflects the relationship with myself. Like, what the words that I use towards myself are always much more negative when I'm not grounded. And you know, the other thing too that goes in alignment with that is that you're always going to have a fear.
Mm-hmm.
You're always going to have something that you're like, oh, but what if this happens? What if I reoccur? What if my child leaves home today and, like, something bad happens, right? Like, we all have those fears that we can't control. The only thing that we can do is control how we think about them, and bring it from an irrational fear to a fear that is like, okay, I get it. This is what I'm really concerned about.
Mm-hmm.
And should that happen, then I'll deal with it.
Right.
You
Beautiful.
know?
Yeah. Thank you. I love that you went into that. I love it. I love it. So going back to when, there's always the anticipation, and I know my mom had breast cancer. I think we're getting up to about 15 years out, doing
Oh,
well.
bless her.
Yeah. She often talks about, like, even if she gets like a cold or she gets a cough or if she has a pain that she can't explain, there's this the fear that you spoke of, just the
Yeah.
what if it's back, or what if it's spread, or what if I
Yeah.
have something else, like there just is, that's just kind of in the back of her mind more than I think
Mm-hmm.
she realized at first. Have you find
Mm-hmm.
that that's normal, and how do you help people through that?
Yeah. Yeah, it's absolutely normal. You're always going to have fear. But it's a muscle. I like to tell people it's a muscle you need to work out. Our brains, like, it's kind of like, how's the best way to describe it? It's kind of like as a kid, like thinking that you can't do something, right?
Mhm.
Because you just think that you're stupid, so you don't even try, right? Like, nobody kind of said that to you, but for some
Right.
reason you think that because of
Right.
whatever experience happened.
Mm-hmm.
So going through the trauma of a health crisis where you face your mortality,
Mm-hmm.
but you also lose the innocence of life, right? Like, you lose that oblivious. It's kind of like when people are in love, right? Like, it's
Ignorance
like
is
the first 6
bliss.
months of dating, and you're like, right?
Everything's great.
And then, like, somebody says something bad and you're like, jerk. And then, like, you get into your first fight, and then, like, you're no longer in, like, I'm in love, right? Like, you kind of
Right.
look at the person differently. So that's what happens when you go through a health crisis.
Mm-hmm.
You are then like, you know, I lived my life thinking, like, I'm never going to die, right? But even though I knew I was, and I made sure
Yeah.
that I took the steps, but, like, I didn't think I was going to die tomorrow. And then when
Right.
you get diagnosed with cancer, you're like, holy cow, I could die tomorrow. Like, this is crazy.
Right.
And so what I tell people is that, like, you know what? You could die tomorrow regardless. You could go outside right now and get hit by a bus.
Yeah.
Like, we have no idea what life is going to give us and how it's going to go. We could be on this earth for 5 minutes. We could be on this earth for 50 years more. And I asked them, how do you want to live those 5 minutes? Do you want to live those 5 minutes worrying about the fact that the bus is coming that's about to hit you? Or do you want to spend the time and enjoying and loving the people that are around you, or doing something that inspires you, makes you feel alive?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I tell people. It's okay to live. It's okay to be alive. It's okay to make plans for the future. Like, you still have living to do. You're still here. You're still alive. It may not be perfect, but would you rather not have the opportunity to do that? And, when we have those conversations, we go in depth about their fears. We go in depth about like what they want to do. We create a vision for them for what they want their life to look like and what they want it to be, and like the relationships that they want. It really provides them a place to stand. It provides them a way to, like, when that fear comes up, it's like, okay, I see it. I recognize you.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I'm still going to go and have a great time with my friend and have a cup of coffee.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I'll come back to you later, right? Like,
Right.
that fear's always going to be there, but
Right.
you have to be strong enough to just get beyond it.
Mm-hmm. I love it. Thank you. The other thing I wanted to so we talk about complex PTSD quite frequently on here as well. And
Yeah.
if they're a newer listener, complex PTSD is not necessarily the one-time event where it's, you got raped in a park or you have a terrible car accident. Sometimes it's you have a health issue and it's a repetitive over and over. So every time you go to the doctor, every time you have to have tests done, or someone who's in an abusive relationship, whether it be in relationships or family, it's just kind of a repetitive, they're always talking you down. They're always belittling you. It's not always one big event, but a combination of different events or maybe similar. So you mentioned while you were going through your health crisis, you lost your home from a tornado.
Oh yeah.
And
we've had a couple of really rough years.
yes. Can you tell me how how it affected you and how you kind of worked through all of the, because I have a similar situation where it wasn't just one traumatic event, but it was just kind of the snowball effect. It was just like, are you kidding me? Right. And it's so easy to go into victim mode. And why is this happening to me? Why did God let this happen to me? Where are my angels? And sometimes you can really get bogged down in that. Can you speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. So, I have done a lot of work to make sure that when circumstances happen, I'm not at the effect of my circumstances. And that's where I really, where people should really live. It's that warrior versus survivor mindset. Like, survivor is somebody like you allow your circumstances to push you around, right? They're that bully. You don't have a say. You kind of just like, okay, fine, I'll go that way. Like, I don't like it, but it's just the way it is. But the warrior mindset, and that's why my podcast is Conversations with Courageous Cancer Warriors, because I don't call myself a survivor. I'm not a survivor. I absolutely hate it. I'm a warrior because I'm going to fight for myself. I'm going to look and see what my options are. And I'm going to go for what works for me. And so having that mindset allowed me to go through. So first I had to sell my home, uproot myself, move to a city, move 3 times, to then get diagnosed, to then have my dad get diagnosed, to move to Connecticut, to then move to Nashville where my boyfriend was. Now, mind you, this is all within 2 years. And change my job twice or 3 times. And we were living downtown Nashville. And if any of you have seen the footage of downtown Nashville, of the cars on the roof getting thrown around, if you Google it, or if you Google Nashville Germantown neighborhood, you will see footage of the tornado coming through town. And all the footage that was on national news was our building. Now, my boyfriend had lived there for 11 years. This was my 2nd year there. The sirens would always go off. Like, I'm a New England girl. Like, give me a hurricane. I get it, right? Like, I understand. But I'm like, what is this tornado stuff? Like, what? Like, it was foreign to me. So it's one of those things that, like, I'm so blessed because, like, the universe gives you signs. You just really need to be open. One of my friends on Face was like, she's like, nasty storm coming through. Everybody, hunker down. And I was like, what are you talking about? Because, like, we don't have TV. We don't watch TV. And so she's like, there's some severe thunderstorms coming through. She's like, make sure, you know, and I was like, oh, thank you for letting me know. I'm going to go close my windows because we were about to sleep with the windows open, right?
Right.
So because of my medication, I have insomnia sometimes. And it just so happened that this night I had insomnia. We have a new little French bulldog puppy that we adore. He's our baby. So I was like looking for food for him, right? I was looking into the raw diets. Like I was just online on my phone. And the sirens started. My boyfriend had taken NyQuil. We never take that kind of stuff, but he was just feeling terrible. And he's like, should I take some? I'm like, go. He was passed out next to me. The sirens started. His name is Dan. Dan, can you please wake up? Dan, the sirens are going off. Lori, the sirens go off all the time. It doesn't mean anything. And he like turns over.
Oh no.
My phone, this is the messed up part and why the Nashville tornado was terrible. My phone alerted me to a tornado warning. Now, mind you, I didn't compute the difference between a watch and a warning as this is happening.
Mm-hmm.
It flashed tornado warning, but it never made the sound, which is why so many people got injured or died because they didn't get the alert buzzer that comes along with something like that didn't go off. And we both got it. And so when I saw my phone light up, I saw his phone light up. I'm like, Danny, tornado warning. So of course, naturally, the first thing we do is go to the window to look to see what's going on outside.
Yeah.
And we literally saw the cloud come over. And in that moment, I'm like, hallway closet, where do we go? Like, I didn't even think of the bathtub, right?
Right.
Oh, where do we go?
Yeah.
And so we hunkered down in our closet and we literally like the door was just shaking and it was terrible. And like, I learned in that moment, there's two types of people. There's somebody like me who cracks jokes at everything. Like I find the humor in everything, which is what allows me to go through trauma.
Uh-huh. I think it's a medical field thing like, too. You have to have kind of a weird sense of humor.
Right. I think you're right. And I remember saying to him, like, well, we talked about maybe moving to another part of town. God's answering us right now. Right. And Dan is total opposite. He gave me nothing. I had my best material and he was stoic. He was quiet. He didn't say a word except for, Laura, I don't think we're going to make it. And I was like, what the hell? So and like, we're healthcare givers, right? Like we love to take care of people. So then I'm forgetting about there's a tornado going on outside. And I'm looking at him like, are you okay? Are you all right? Like, what do you need? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Terrible. So long story short, our building was condemned. We had literally 5 minutes to get whatever belongings we could take. And, you know, I looked at Dan and I'm like, where are we going to go? Right? There's nowhere for us to go here. I said, so he needed to be in Atlanta for work. I'm like, let's grab a bag. Let's get in the truck. Like, let's get one of our cars out. We were very lucky that we were parked on the 3rd floor, so our vehicles were fine. And I'm like, let's drive to Atlanta. Let's let the city settle for a hot second because we had a gas leak in our building. Our streets were impassable. Like they made one path for people to get their cars out. There was complete devastation everywhere. Like there was a building of cinder blocks that the cinder blocks were thrown like down the street. I mean, it was absolutely terrible. And because it happened so late at night, we didn't realize how bad it was until we left the shelter the next morning and we were walking through. And part of why now I live in Sarasota, even though we just were in Vermont and got a tornado in Vermont, but whatever, is because every time the wind would pick up in Nashville and the trees would go sideways, I would automatically start having a panic attack and crying. Mm-hmm. And I knew that the environment at the time was not where I needed to be. Right. So that goes back to listen to yourself, listen to what works for you, listen to what doesn't work for you. And you have the option to change something, change it. It's okay. Like Nashville's not going anywhere. We could go back, right? Mm-hmm. But it's like, I will never have been able to heal and get at peace if I constantly had the tornado sirens and the trees going sideways in that town. Mm-hmm. So
Wow.
when people ask me like, how do you deal with it? Like, you need to listen to what you need, and it's individual specific. And Dan and I are very fortunate that we have similar mechanisms outside of the making jokes and no jokes, that on how to handle stuff. And that's also something that comes with relationship. You kind of learn who are going to be your advocate, and they're going to support you in like doing what you feel you need to do in order to get yourself to a safe place.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, it's terrible. I
No,
never want to go through it again.
kidding.
It was terrible.
It's funny that you said, I'm an East Coast girl, give me hurricanes. I'm a Midwest girl, give me the tornadoes. Like,
Oh
I'm
my
scared
God.
to death of
Oh my God.
hurricanes. Yeah, like, I'm the
Ah.
complete opposite.
But hurricanes are coming, right? Like, they're
That's
never a
true.
surprise. Like,
That's
you
true.
can prepare, you could evacuate. Like, this was on, like, we had 2-minute warning, 2 minutes between the sirens going off and it being on our building. Like, and that's why it was so devastating for the region. It really, really devastated the town. A lot of people, and it was 50 miles long. Like, it's just like, I don't know. But then we went through Vermont for the summer.
Right.
And there was a tornado in Vermont, which never happened. So I'm like, God, what are you trying to tell my universe? What are you trying to tell me? Like,
Right.
This is no joke now. Like, this is insane. Yeah, like, and like when it happened in Vermont, and I got tornado warnings on my phone. The tornado in Vermont was probably 5 miles away from me, but they still put warnings for us because you don't know where they're going to go.
Right.
I was on the bathroom floor in a fetal position holding my dog, like, and crying hysterically. So I recognize I have a lot of work to do in this area. But at least I'm not having to deal with it every day, like so many other people with their own trauma and their triggers. It's like, know your triggers,
Right. Right. And you have to be aware of your triggers in order to work on them. And like you said, get yourself out of the situation if you can, whatever those triggers are. And you just have to work with what you can do in your situation. Triggers can be, I'm sure now whenever you hear that sound on your phone, it's a trigger. And it's really hard. I talk about this too. It's really hard to heal in an environment that caused your trauma or part of your trauma. It's really hard to heal when you stay in that environment. Kind of like when alcoholics are trying to not be alcoholics anymore and quit drinking. They have to change their friends. They have to change where they go, where they socialize, what they have in their fridge. I mean, they just have to change what's around them and have to change their whole environment and their habits. It's not just a matter of just, oh, okay. It's not always that easy. You have to physically remove yourself from situations.
Absolutely. And like, part of what happened was this tornado happened March 3rd. And by April, beginning of April, COVID was alive and real. Right. And so we were dealing with the trauma. We had just moved into a new apartment that we didn't really like. And COVID was going down. And we just didn't feel safe in our home. And I know that sounds odd, but like, Nashville's a safe town, but there was something there. There was something, it was my gut feeling where I'm like, we need to leave. We need to just take a break. So we were fortunate enough that at the time people weren't really moving like they are now. And like, we grabbed the U-Haul and we just left town, and we're like, Sarasota sounds good. I had never been here. Dan had spent a day here, and we're kind of like, I'm like, I just want palm trees. Like, can we get palm trees? And like, we just winged it, and we're fortunate enough to live in a very peaceful environment right now.
Well, I am glad.
Yeah. So find your, like, and that's, I guess, if anybody takes anything from this long convoluted story that I've shared with everyone today, is just like, find what brings you peace.
Yeah.
And if you can't leave the circumstance, then create your own peace.
Absolutely.
Create a little zen area for you. Put headphones on with some music. Like, do whatever it takes for you to be able to manage it. And you're not alone. Reach out. You know what I mean? Like,
yes.
This is what the great part about community is that you have if it's you know, they're people are welcome to contact me, like whatever you need, like you will find people who will be a support.
Yes. And I think it's important to kind of reassess who those people are.
Oh, 100%.
Because there are
and
people
it's okay
who,
to cut people out of your life.
yeah, no matter whether it's DNA or, you know, I really don't like the whole, you know, well, but they're your father, or but they're your mother, or your brother or
Yeah.
sister, or toxic is toxic, abuse is abuse.
I was just gonna say that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't care about your blood. I care about the environment. If they are not good for you, then you remove them completely, or you at least limit their access to you. And it's for your own
Agreed.
peace.
Agreed.
So thank you so much for being here.
Thank
It was
you.
a true pleasure. I hope we can do this again. I really do, because
Absolutely, I would
you've
love
got
to.
an awesome story. You present it well, and it comes around to just where we all can relate. We can all relate, maybe not
Thank you.
necessarily to the tornado or the cancer diagnosis as far as, you know, my listeners, but we all bleed when we get cut, or, you know, we bruise, you know, we bleed under the skin. Our bodies will always react to trauma, and it doesn't matter what cuts you, you're still going to bleed. And it doesn't matter what our trauma is, it still is going to affect our brains differently. It's going to rewire us, and it takes some time to rewire. So even though the cuts may have had different weapons or had a different enemy, it still affects us all. And even though it affects us all differently, we can all understand some of the similarities to all of
Absolutely.
post-traumatic experiences.
You know, I like to say that pain is universal. We all have our version, and they may not be identical, but pain is pain, right? And we need to, as a community, especially now when we're getting so divided, that we need to hold on to the people that light us up.
Yes.
If somebody's not lighting you up, if your circumstance, your work, anything in your life, like, you know, it's so funny, and I promise I'll stop talking, but this is just so great. You know, like, I was going through clothes the other day, and I was going through belongings the other day, because we're, again, purging one more time. And so I was like, if it doesn't leave me with a good feeling, then why am I keeping it? And this is true for clothing. It's true for belongings. It's true for people.
Yeah.
If it doesn't make you feel good, then why are you holding on to it? And if it's something like you feel morally you can't get rid of, then you have the responsibility of limiting the interaction, right? It doesn't mean you need to go and be there all day. Like 10 minutes is fine. You should put your own needs first. It's not selfish.
Healthy boundaries.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
I agree. I totally agree. Well, again, I hope we can do this again. I love you. I will be putting all your information that you gave me in the show notes, how to reach you, if someone wants to reach you.
Thank you.
Other than that information you gave me, is there any other way people should find you or want to look at your stuff? Is there any other information that we need to add?
So everything's available on my website, LoriMarini.com. It has my phone number. It has my email. Like, you could actually call me and talk to me. You could actually email. I will respond back. It's me. It's not an assistant.
Right.
And it's
true.
I have some new, you know, and I have a couple of things in the pipeline. I have a new program that's coming out, which is a vision board, where I work with people to create a vision for themselves. It's a really inexpensive program. So that is going to be launched literally next week. And I have a new, I'll send you the link on that too. And then I have
I'll put that in the notes.
I have a book coming out, and I will be a host on a radio show for a 5-podcast session coming up pretty soon. So I have a lot of things, and I would love to hear from people. Like, what do you want to hear about? Because they gave me a blank slate, and I could talk about anything that I want. So I would love to hear from your listeners. I would love to hear, like, what would inspire you? Like, what do you need? So
awesome. Well, if I get anything, if I don't get a hold of you, if I hear anything, I will send it your way. Whatever I can do to help, let me know. I'm so happy. Yes, send me all that information, and we will let everyone know.
Thank
And
you
good
so
luck
much.
with all that. Good luck.
I know. Yeah, I've been busy.
Yes, you have, but good busy. I love it. I love it. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for all you do. I feel like I gained a friend.
Oh, I do too. Thank you
Good.
so much. And, this is a see you later, not a goodbye.
Yes, I love it. Perfect. Thanks,
All
Lori.
right. Thanks. Bye.
So,
Hey, I just wanted to come back real quick and thank you so much for your support and your messages. I promise you, I read every single one of them personally, and they mean so much to me. They seriously keep me going. I invite you to subscribe and share this podcast. Thanks for being here.